Lin Xiaoran sat at the desk, staring at the pile of endless reports on the computer screen, and her brain seemed to be filled with cotton, buzzing. He rubbed his son's pussy and tried to make himself feel a little more awake, but the inexplicable feeling of fatigue seemed to stick to his body, and he couldn't get rid of it no matter how hard he shook it. Today is Friday, and the air in the office is more subdued than usual. The sound of colleagues knocking on the keyboard with their heads low is like an unfinished lullaby. He glanced at his phone, and the screen showed that it was 5:30 p.m., and he could get off work after another half an hour. After all, can you eat together at night? Zhang Xiang next to him looked over, smiling, and holding a bottle of mineral water that had just been taken from the tea room. Zhang Xiang was the dead party of Lin Xiaoran when he was a university student. After graduating from school, he entered the same company, which is the only comfort in such a boring job. No, I'm really not in a state of strength tonight, so I'll go home and lie down. Lin Xiaoran slammed his hand, and there was a sense of indescribable fatigue in his voice. He always felt unfavorable for the past few days, couldn't sleep well at night, and was always distracted during the day. He often had some strange pictures in his brain, as if he had seen them somewhere, but he couldn't say where they were. Okay, look at your dark circles, you should take a break. Zhang Zi was proud of his shoulders, and without saying anything more, he continued to talk to another colleague about the weekend's plan. Lin Xiaoran pulled the corner of his mouth hard, and his eyes returned to the screen, but his fingers stopped on the keyboard without moving. His visual line was a little blurred, and a picture suddenly flashed through the sea of brain, a vast wilderness, with sand coming from the surface, and the sky from afar was burning with angry flames. He held a heavy long sword in his hand, covered in broken armor, and his ears were filled with sounds of killing and metal collision. He could even feel the rhythm of his heart beating violently in his chest, as if he was about to break his ribs. Lin Xiaoran. A shout pulled him back from the strange picture, and he shook violently and almost slid down from the chair. When I looked up, I saw that it was Lao Wang, the head of the department, who was standing at his desk with a piece of paper, and his face was not very good looking. What are you, stupid? This data must be handed over today, don't drag it until next week. Ah, okay, let's do it right away. Lin Xiaoran was busy and suddenly felt in his heart. At that moment, he really felt that he was not in this office, but in that wilderness, holding a sword and preparing to fight desperately with something. That real feeling made him sweat on his back. After get off work, he dragged his heavy steps back home, threw his bag on the sand, and fell on the bed without changing his shoes. The rental house was quiet and there were only the sound of carts coming from outside the window. He closed his eyes and tried to relax himself, but the miserable pictures in his brain began to appear again. This time it was not a wilderness, but an ancient stone temple. The walls were filled with runes that were incomprehensible, and a burnt smell was filled with air. He stood in the middle of the hall, in front of him a man in black robe, wearing a mask on his face, and his voice was as low as if it was coming from the underground. You can't escape, warrior, your fate has long been destined. Lin Xiao suddenly opened his eyes, his chest was undulating, and his heartbeat was as fast as if it was about to explode. He sat up, grabbed the water cup on the head of the bed and took a sip. The ice-cold water slid down his throat, which made him feel a little colder. I see, what's going on, he muttered in a low voice, wiping the sweat off his head. This is not the first time this situation has happened. About a month ago, he started to do some particularly real dreams. In the dream, he was not the ordinary white leader sitting in the grid and knocking on the keyboard, but a warrior who was fighting for his life on the battlefield. He could remember the feeling of slapping every time he slapped, and even the presence of every scar on his body. At first he thought it was just too much pressure, and his brain was thinking, but these dreams became more and more frequent, and even suddenly flashed during the day, inserting into his real life like a video clip. He turned over and got out of bed, walked to the window and opened the window. Outside was the familiar night view of the city. The lights of the high-rise building were connected together, and everything was so normal. But he felt unspeakable uneasy in his heart, and he always felt that something was watching him secretly, waiting for him to make some fatal mistake. No, I can't continue like this. Lin Xiaoran gritted his teeth and decided to go to see a psychological doctor tomorrow. He does not believe in ghosts and gods, nor does he believe in any spiritual events. The only explanation is that there is something wrong with his spirit. It may be that the work pressure is too high, or there is something unsolved in the potential, so he has to figure it out, otherwise it will collapse sooner. That night, he slept for a few hours and fell into a more realistic dream. This time he stood on a cliff, with deep darkness under his feet, and a dense sky covered by clouds. Thunder and lightning rolled in the clouds, as if to tear the entire world apart. He was still the broken armor, and the long sword in his hand was covered with blood and fell to the ground. He turned around and saw a woman in a long white robe standing far away, her long hair moving at risk, and her face was filled with an indescribable injury. "You finally came." The woman's voice was very light and clearly entered his ears. "I've been waiting for you for a long time, Lin Xiaoran." He was stunned and seemed to be hit hard by something in his brain. How could this woman know his name? This is just a dream. He wanted to open his mouth, but his throat seemed to be blocked by something and could not make any sound. The woman approached slowly, his shadow reflected in her blue eyes. She stretched out her hand and touched his head lightly. The ice-cold touch made him shake. "The bridge of memory has been opened, you can't escape." Her voice were filled with an unquestionable power. "The two worlds are waiting for you, warrior, wake up." The next second, Lin Xiao suddenly sat up from the bed, gasping heavily, and sweating all over his head. He looked around, there was still the familiar rental house. The sky was bright outside the window, and the morning light came in through the gaps in the window. He looked down and saw sweat all over his palms, and his fingertips were still shaking slightly. The woman's voice was still heard in his ears, as if it had actually existed. "The bridge of memory? What a ghost thing," he said to himself, with a panic in his voice. He tried to recall his dream just now, but the more he thought about it, the more he felt he was not in agreement. The woman called him a warrior, just like his identity in other dreams, and what she said two worlds made him feel inexplicably angry. He grabbed the phone and was ready to call Zhang Xiang, and told him about it and heard his opinion, but his fingers stopped just after touching the screen. He suddenly realized that he didn't want others to know about these things, even if he was his best friend. He had a straightforward feeling that all this was not a simple dream or psychological problem, but something deeper and more dangerous. That morning, he asked for a half-day vacation and went to a nearby psychological clinic. The doctor is a middle-aged man wearing glasses, with a gentle language, and asked him some questions about life pressure, sleep quality, and family background. Lin Xiaoran roughly explained the recent situation. Of course, he did not mention the specific content of those dreams, but only said that he would be distracted during the day when he was always having a nightmare dream. It sounds like a light illusion caused by pressure, which may be excessive fatigue or potential anxiety. The doctor pushed the lens and opened some sleep-aided medicines for him. "Go back and have a good rest, adjust the rhythm of life, and don't put too much pressure on yourself. If the situation does not improve, you can do a detailed inspection." Lin Xiao suddenly pointed his head and left the clinic with the prescription, but he didn't feel much relaxed. He knew that the doctor's explanation sounded reasonable, but those real feelings of dreams and details were not explained by the two words pressure. He even began to wonder whether he really had memories of two worlds. One was Lin Xiaoran, who was sitting in the office now, and the other was the warrior who held a long sword and fought on the battlefield. After returning home, he was not in a hurry to take medicine, but sat on the sofa and stared blankly. The sky outside the window became darker and the city fell into the noise of night again. He repeatedly recalled the words of the woman in white robe, the bridge of memory, and two worlds. These words were like a thorn, piercing in his heart and could not be pulled out no matter how hard it was. At this moment, the lights in the room suddenly flashed, then completely turned off, and the whole room fell into darkness. Lin Xiaoran was stunned, got up and walked to the window, and found that the lights on other buildings outside were still lit, which obviously was not a power shutdown. He raised his eyebrows and wanted to check the gate, but he heard a low smile coming from behind him. "Who is there?" He turned around suddenly, his heartbeat accelerating instantly. In the darkness, he saw a figure standing in the corner of the room, wearing a long robe, with hair loose, and unable to see his face clearly. The figure raised his head slowly, revealing a pair of blue eyes that were flashing with glimmer, exactly like the woman in the dream. "Lin Xiaoran," I said, "you can't escape." Her voice was low and cold, with a creepy sense of pressure. "The bridge of memory has been opened, and the fate of both worlds is connected to you. Be prepared to welcome your true identity." Lin Xiao took a step back, leaning against the wall, and his brain was blank. He wanted to say, but his throat seemed to be pinched, and his breathing became difficult. The woman approached slowly, and every step seemed to step on the rhythm of his heartbeat, with an inexplicable chill in the air. "Who are you? What do you want to fuck?" he finally whispered, his voice as if it was not his. The woman stopped her pace, and the corners of her mouth slightly raised, revealing a meaningful smile. "I'm Alice, your guide." Her voice was soft and full of power. "As for what I want to do, I'm just here to tell you that the game has begun." As the voice fell, the lights in the room suddenly lit up, and the dazzling light made Lin Xiaoran shut his eyes subconsciously. When he opened his eyes again, the woman who called Ellie was no longer visible. There was no one in the room, only his rapid breathing was resounding. He stood there, his hands tightly clenched, his palms covered in sweat. He knew that all this was not an illusion or a dream. The appearance of that woman caused his already chaotic world to collapse. He could even feel something bigger was approaching him, and he could not escape no matter what. That night, Lin Xiaoran didn't sleep anymore. He sat on the sofa, staring at the ceiling, his brain full of Ellie's words. He didn't know what the bridge of memory was, nor what the so-called two worlds meant, but he understood that from this moment on, his life would never return to the past. The night outside the window is getting deeper and deeper, and the city lights far away are like an illusory ocean. He suddenly remembered that the wilderness, the stone temple, and the scenes of blood and fire in the dream were really just dreams? Or is that's his real past? He lowered his head and looked at his hands. The traces in his palms were familiar and unfamiliar. For a moment, he even felt that he could feel the weight of the long sword and hear the sound of the killings in the remote war scene. He slammed his head and tried to throw these thoughts out of his brain, but deep in his heart, a voice was in the low voice, "Lin Xiaoran, you can't escape. The night wind blows in from the windows, carrying a biting heart." He wrapped his coat tightly and his eyes turned to the remote skyline. In the vicinity, he seemed to see a faint light, like a bridge, connecting two completely different worlds. Lin Xiaoran sat on the sand, wrapped in his jacket, and his eyes remained on the blurry night view of the city outside the window. The night wind dripped in from the window, carrying a biting chill, which made him unable to help but slap a cold. Just now, the appearance of Ellie seemed to have broken a hole in his world. Those fragments that originally thought were just dreams are now smashing into his brain like real memories. He tried to take a deep breath and told himself that all this might be just illusions, but the uneasiness in his heart could not be suppressed. He looked down at his hand. The sweat in his palms had dried up, but his fingertips were still shaking slightly. The bridge of memory mentioned by Ellie also has the fate of two worlds, which are like a group of mists, making him unable to touch his head at all. He is just an ordinary white man, living from 9 to 5 every day. His biggest pressure is endless reports and supervisors' complaints. How can he be related to what fate? No, I have to figure out what's going on. He gritted his teeth, stood up from the sofa, walked to the table and grabbed his cell phone, hesitated for a moment, and still passed Zhang Xiang's number. The phone rang a few times, and the sound of Zhang Xiang's scattering voice came from the head. "Hey, really, are you looking for me so late? Didn't you say you want to go home and lie down?" "Xiang, I want to tell you something." Lin Xiaoran had a slight hesitation in his voice. He didn't know how to open his mouth, but it turned out that it was too disgusting. "What's wrong? You hear that you are not right in this sentence. What's wrong with you?" Zhang Xiang's voice suddenly became serious, and he could still hear his static silence in the background. Lin Xiaoran was silent for a few seconds, and finally opened his mouth. I have been doing some strange dreams recently. I feel it is very real, and there are some chaotic scenes that will suddenly appear during the day. I just saw a woman appearing in my house, saying some inexplicable things, and then disappeared. The phone calmed down for a while, and then Zhang Xiang laughed out loud. Brother, you are so stressful, are you thinking about it? Woman? Disappearing? This sounds like a horror movie. Have you been staying up too late recently and your spirits are a little broken? Lin Xiaoran smiled bitterly. He had long expected Zhang Xiang to react. I also think it might be that my mental problem. Today I went to see a psychological doctor and got some medicine. But I always think this is not that simple. The woman's appearance, and what she said, is too real, as if it really happened. Okay, that's it. I'll accompany you to see the doctor tomorrow, or find a place to relax. Don't think about it all at home. Zhang Xiang's words were filled with concern. You sleep first, don't think too much, and we'll talk about anything tomorrow. After hanging the phone, Lin Xiao suddenly sighed. He knew that Zhang Xiang had good intentions, but can this matter be solved by relaxation alone? He threw his cell phone aside, walked to the bed and lay down, closed his eyes and tried to sleep for a while, but the brain was still a mess. Ellie's blue eyes, the low voice, and what she said, "The game has begun," were like a stone pressing on his heart, making him breathless. After a long time, he finally fell asleep in a daze. The dreamland fell again, and this time he returned to the familiar wilderness, with dry cracked land under his feet, and the sky far away was dyed with red flames. He was still wearing the old armor, holding a long sword in his hand, and there was still a dark red blood on the sword blade. He could hear his breathing, heavy and rapid, as if he had just taken off from a life and death struggle. Lin Xiaoran. A voice came from behind, gently carrying the power that cannot be ignored. He turned around suddenly, seeing Ellie standing far away, her white robe moving in the wind, and a glimmer of light in her blue eyes. She approached slowly, without any expression on her face, as if she could see through all his thoughts. "What are you here to fuck?" Lin Xiaoran took a step back subconsciously, held the sword in his hand tightly, and brought a piece of defense in the sound. "I said, I'm your guide." Ellie stopped and her eyes fell on the sword in his hand. "You don't need to be enemies of me, warrior, I'm here to help you find the truth." "The truth? What is the truth?" Lin Xiao suddenly raised his eyebrows, and the warning in his heart was stunning. "I just want to pass through my normal life, and I don't want to be trapped and entered by these inexplicable things of you." "What do you mean by the bridge of memory, the two worlds?" Ellie was silent for a while, then raised her hand and slapped it lightly. A faint light suddenly appeared in the air, like a long wire floating between them. The light flashed in dark, as if it would break at any time, and it dissipated a strange attraction, which made Lin Xiaoran's eyes unable to move. "This is the bridge of memory." Ellie's voice was low and calm. "It connects two worlds, one that you call reality, and the other that is here, the country of magic and war. It's not a dream to stand here, but because your memory has crossed this bridge, allowing you to travel between the two worlds." Lin Xiaoran stared at the light, his heart beat faster and faster. He wanted to say that this was nonsense, but there was a voice in his heart telling him that it was true. He could feel the temperature of the light, and even heard the sound from the other end of the light, like the sound of a keyboard knocking in the office, or like the sound of a killing on the battlefield, intertwined together, making his head burst into tears. "Why is it me?" He gritted his teeth, and there was a burst of anger in his voice. "I am just an ordinary person, why are you being rolled into this?" "Because you were not an ordinary person from the beginning." Ellie's eyes became more profitable. "Your existence is the key to the exchange of two worlds. The bridge of memory has chosen you, and you must assume this responsibility, otherwise both worlds will collapse due to your hesitation." Crash? Lin Xiaoran was stunned, and there were countless questions in his brain. "Are you saying that if I don't do anything, my world, and here, will it be ruined?" Ellie clicked a little, but didn't explain it anymore, but just reached out and touched the light gently. The light became brighter in an instant, as if it was injected with some kind of power. Then, She turned to Lin Xiaoran. You need to learn to control this memory, otherwise, it will swallow you, leaving you lost between two worlds and never able to find your true self. Control? How to control it? Lin Xiaoran felt that his brain was about to explode. These words sounded like Tianshu, completely beyond his understanding. Follow me. I'll teach you. Ellie's voice was filled with an unquestionable tone. But you have to be prepared, and this road is not easy. Your trouble in the real world is just the beginning, and here you have to face the real enemy. Evil? Lin Xiaoran felt nervous, thinking of the man in black robe wearing a mask in his dream before, and the low voice, are you saying, that guy wants to kill me? Carlos. Ellie's eyes turned cold. He is the dark leader of the magic world and your enemy. He has seen the waves of the bridge of memory and will soon find you. He will not allow you to destroy his plan. Lin Xiaoran swallowed and his heart was full of hair. He didn't know what Carlos was, but just listening to the name makes him feel that he was not a good character. He looked down at the drama in his hand and suddenly realized that he seemed to have really had a fighting memory in this world. Those scars and bloodshots, can they be real? Then what should I do now? He raised his head and looked at Ellie, with a helpless sound in his voice. Wake up first. Ellie's mouth slightly slapped, revealing a meaningful smile. In fact, there is your battlefield in the world. I will come to find you again after you finish the troubles there. As the voice fell, the wilderness began to blur, and the forest suddenly felt a strong dizzy, as if it was being pulled by something. The next second, he suddenly opened his eyes and found that he was still lying on the bed of the rental house. It was already early morning outside the window, and the sky was coming through the window, making the room bright. He sat up, his chest undulating and sweating all over his head. He looked down at his hand, with no scorpion in his palm, nor blood in his palm, but the feeling in his brain was very real, as if he had really grasped that heavy weapon. He took a deep breath and tried to calm his mood, but his brain still recalled Ellie's words, control memory, Carlos, and the battlefield of two worlds. I'm seeing you, can you still pass this day? He murmured in a low voice, and when he grabbed the phone on the bed, he saw that it was already 7:30 in the morning. He rubbed his son's hole and decided not to think about these messy things first, wash his face and wake up before saying it. But just as he got up, his phone suddenly started to rise, which was called by Zhang Xiang. He picked up the phone, and Zhang Xiang's quick voice came from the head. After that, where are you? Come to the company quickly and something happened. What happened? Lin Xiaoran was stunned and felt inexplicably nervous. The report you submitted yesterday was completely wrong, and the supervisor was almost angry. He said that if you don't give me a statement today, you'll let you go. Zhang Xiang's voice was filled with anxiety. I'll help you for a while, but you have to come over, otherwise you really won't be able to take the opportunity. Lin Xiaoran's brain buzzed. What was yesterday's report? He had clearly checked it several times, how could he get wrong? But now it was not the time to think about these things. He quickly responded, quit the phone, grabbed the clothes and pulled them out. Along the way, his heart was as troubled as a group of numbness, and the things he reported were just a little trouble, but the war scene in the real world that Alice said made him feel that this was not that simple. Sure enough, after arriving at the company, the supervisor, Lao Wang, would slam his face and say that he was not serious about his work, almost causing the entire department to be sued by customers. Lin Xiaoran lowered his head and was distracted. He thought that this was not right, as if someone had deliberately messed with him. After all, what's wrong with you? It's not like your style. After the meeting, Zhang Xiang patted his shoulder and felt worried. Is there really something wrong, swaying me? Lin Xiaoran reluctantly pulled the corner of his mouth and slammed his head. It's nothing, I just haven't had a good sleep recently, my brain is a little chaotic. Thank you, brother, I just said to me. Zhang Xiang spoke up and didn't ask any more. He just said, come to me any time if you have something to do, don't carry it yourself. After saying that, he turned back to the workstation. Lin Xiaoran sat back to his seat and stared at the computer screen and stared at it. He opened the report and looked carefully. Sure enough, he found that the data had been moved by someone's hand, which was not his original version at all. He raised his eyebrows and felt cold in his heart. Could it be that someone is really messing around behind his back? But who would be a junior to him? At this moment, his vision suddenly blurred, and a picture flashed through his brain: a dark forest, with a heavy smell of blood in the air. A man in a black robe standing far away, his low smile piercing into his ears like a knife. "Warrior, do you think you can escape? Both worlds are my keys." Lin Xiao shook suddenly, and the rat mark in his hand almost fell to the ground. He was looking around, the office was still the same, and his colleagues were busy and no one noticed his strangeness. But he felt like something was tightly clenched in his heart. Can that man in black robe, Carlos, really affect the real world? He gritted his teeth and forced himself to calm down, but the anxiety deep in his heart became increasingly thirsty. He knew that it was just now that all this began, whether it was real or that magical world, the real trouble was still behind. That night, after he got home, he no longer tried to sleep, but sat on the sofa, recalling Ellie's words repeatedly in his brain. He knew what he had to do and could no longer wait for the trouble to come to the door. He picked up his cell phone, took out the medicine given by the psychological doctor before, hesitated for a moment, and threw it around. He concedes that this is not something that medicine can solve. At this moment, the lights in the room flashed again and then returned to normal. He felt nervous in his heart, and he stood up and looked around. Sure enough, the familiar figure appeared in the corner again, with white robe, long hair, blue eyes, and Ellie. "Are you ready?" Her voice was still so soft, with a sense of irresistible pressure. Lin Xiaoran took a deep breath and pointed, "Tell me what to do next." Ellie smiled slightly, stretched out her hand, and the faint light appeared in the air again. "Follow me, warrior. I will teach you how to cross the bridge of memory and how to face your enemy. But remember, there is no rest in this road." Lin Xiaoran looked at the light and felt mixed emotions in his heart. He knew that once he took this step, his life would change completely, but he also understood that he had no choice. He stretched out his hand, and the moment he touched the light, a cold energy spread throughout his body through his fingertips, as if some ancient contract had been activated. The light in the room became brighter and brighter, and Ellie's figure began to blur, but her voice was still clear. "The first step is to distinguish the true feelings of memory. In reality or magic, which one is your root and which one is your enemy?" Lin Xiao suddenly closed his eyes and let the energy wrap him up. He could feel that his consciousness was being pulled, as if he was about to cross some invisible boundary. And deep in his brain, the pictures of the two worlds began to intersect: the real office, the wilderness of magic, and the two intersected together, making him unable to tell what is true or illusion. He knew that this was just the beginning, the real challenge was still waiting for him. Lin Xiaoran closed his eyes and felt the cold energy flowing in his body, like a small current passing through every nerve, making him both awake and confused. The light, the glimmer of the bridge of memory, walked through his fingertips, bringing a strange touch, as if he had touched some invisible border. His consciousness was pulled, and the real rental house and the magical wilderness intersected in the brain, and the boundaries between the two became increasingly blurred. He could hear the sound of the keyboard knocking in the office, and the smell of sand and blood in the wilderness. Two completely different worlds fought for the leadership in his brain. "Relax, warrior." Ellie's voice came from some far away, soft and soft. "Don't resist, let the memory flow, and you can find its roots." Lin Xiaoran bit her teeth tightly and tried to do what she said. He took a deep breath, making himself stop thinking about those chaotic scenes, but focused on the flow of energy. Slowly, he felt his mind as if he was being pulled away, and his body became lightly floating, as if floating in the air. When he opened his eyes again, he realized that he was no longer in the rental house, but was standing in an endless space, surrounded by flowing light, like a sea of stars, and under his feet was a long streak of light, winding and twisting, leading to two different directions. This is the core of the bridge of memory. Ellie appeared beside him, her white robe swaying slightly in the air, her blue eyes flashing with a shimmer. "One side leads to your real world, the other side leads to the magical world. You can feel their connection and their conflict." Lin Xiaoran looked down at the light belt under his feet, and could indeed feel two completely different forces pulling him. On one side is the familiar city atmosphere, surrounded by the noise of cars and the crowd. On the other side is the Cold War scene, carrying the resounding metal collision and shouting. He tried to take a step, but found that with each step, the memory in the brain became even more chaotic, and the picture of the two worlds flashed like a horse light, making him feel pain. What should I do? He covered his brain, with a burst of pain in his voice. These memories, they are about to tear me apart. Focus on your will. Ellie's voice was still calm. The power of the bridge of memory comes from you, and only you can decide its direction. Choosing one side, or two sides, depends on your determination. Choose? Lin Xiaoran was stunned and suddenly raised his head and looked at her. Are you saying, I must give up a world? Ellie didn't answer directly, but just looked slightly, her eyes as deep as she could see through his soul. The balance of the two worlds has been broken, and the existence of the bridge of memory allows them to influence each other and even swallow each other. If you don't make a decision, both worlds will collapse because of you. Lin Xiaoran's heart sank, and countless pictures flashed in her brain. Zhang Xiang's smile in the real world, the broken daily life in the office, the warmth of the small rental house in her home, the wilderness battlefield in the magic world, the broken armor, and the figures of those vague and profound warriors. He never thought that he would face such a choice and give up any side, which would be like cutting off part of himself to him. Is there no other way? He gritted his teeth, and there was a sense of reluctance in his voice. I don't want to give up any world, I just want to figure out who I am. Ellie was silent for a while and finally opened her mouth. There is another way, but the risk is even greater. You can try to break the rules of the memory bridge and make the two worlds independent again, but this requires you to pay a huge price. Your memory, and even your existence, may be erased. Lin Xiaoran was stunned, and it seemed that something was smashing his brain hard. Erase existence? This sounds more terrible than choosing to give up. But he looked at the light belt under his feet and felt the tearing of the two worlds in the brain. He suddenly realized that if he didn't do anything, he would have been swallowed up by these memories, and even who he could not figure out. I'll choose the second way. He took a deep breath, his eyes calmed down. No matter what price I have to pay, I don't want to destroy any world because of me. Tell me, what to do. Ellie's eyes flashed with a complex light, as if she hadn't expected him to make a decision so soon. She clicked her head and reached out her hand. A dark red ball of light appeared in the air, emitting a dangerous breath. This is the core force of the bridge of memory and the source of the connection between the two worlds. To break the rules, you must destroy it. But remember, Carlos is also looking for this core, and he will not let you succeed easily. Carlos. Lin Xiaoran bit his teeth tightly, and when he thought of the man in black robe wearing a mask, an inexplicable anger surged in his heart. He didn't know what kind of grudges he had between him and Carlos, but those memory fragments told him that this guy was his old enemy, and he was his greatest threat no matter which world he was in. Take me away. He looked at Ellie, his voice low and determined. No matter what the price is, I will try it. Ellie clicked her head a little, and didn't say anything more, just let her hand off, and the light in the air began to flow rapidly. Lin Xiao suddenly felt a strong dizzy, as if she was being pulled by something. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself standing in a dark forest, with a heavy smell of blood in the air. The sky far away was reddish by the flames of apes, and the low voices and occasional wild beasts roaring around his ears. This is the border of the magical world and the core of the bridge of memory. Ellie's voice sounded beside him. Carlos is already ahead, we must destroy the core before him. Lin Xiao suddenly pointed his head and looked down. He found that he was wearing the old armor again, holding the familiar long sword in his hand. He took a deep breath and felt the weight of the shank. A fighting urge emerged in his heart inexplicably, as if the warrior in his memory was awakened. He followed Ellie forward. The atmosphere in the forest became more and more stressful, and the shadows of the trees swayed in the fire, like a twisted ghost face. Not long after I left, a low smile suddenly came from the front, as if it was coming from deep underground, making people creepy. Lin Xiaoran's heart tightened, held the sword tightly, and stopped. Sure enough, a figure walked out of the darkness, black robe, mask, and red eyes flashed in the darkness, which was Carlos. "Warrior, you're here." Carlos's voice was low and sandy, with a mockery. "I've been waiting for this day for too long. What do you think you can change? Both worlds are my keys." Lin Xiaoran bit his teeth tightly, and countless memory fragments flashed in the sea of brain: the battle on the battlefield, the fall of the fighters, and Carlos's laughter. He didn't know where these memories came from, but he knew that there was an unresolved hatred between him and this gang. Small talk. He suddenly lifted the sword, with anger in his voice. "Today you either die, or I die." Carlos smiled softly, raised his hand, and a dark purple energy swelled under his black robe, like countless poisonous snakes, snatching towards Lin Xiao. Lin Xiaoran subconsciously flashed his body, and the blade slashed through the air, blocking a few energy, but more dark powers came from all directions, leaving him almost nowhere to hide. "Be careful." Ellie's voice sounded, and then a blue light shield appeared in front of Lin Xiaoran, holding back most of the attacks. She stood aside, a staff appeared in her hand, and the blue light flowed around her, like some kind of protection zone. "Alice, you still choose to stand by him." Carlos sneered in his voice. "Do you think that by complaining about you two can stop me from controlling the bridge of memory? I never thought of stopping you." Ellie's voice was so cold that it was surprising. "I was just guiding him to find the real way." "Carlos, your ambition will eventually destroy yourself." Lin Xiao didn't have time to hear them verbal battles. He took advantage of the moment when Carlos was distracted and rushed forward, and the long sword pointed directly into the other party's chest. Carlos reacted very quickly, and when his side flashed, the dark energy turned into a long spear, stabbing Lin Xiaoran's shoulder hard. He gritted his teeth and held it hard, and the blade turned around. He drew over Carlos' black robe and brought out a dark purple spark. "I have some ability." Carlos smiled, with a silk of praise in his voice, "but that's not enough." As the voice fell, the darkness in the forest suddenly regained, as if it had come alive, turning into countless touches and coming to Lin Xiaoran and Ellie. Lin Xiao suddenly slapped a few pieces, but more touches emerged from the ground, making him tired of dealing with it. The light of Ellie's staff became brighter and brighter, and the blue light and darkness intertwined in the forest, as if two forces were colliding violently. "After all, the core is there." Ellie suddenly shouted, pointing in a direction deep in the forest. "I'll hold him up, you go and destroy it." Lin Xiao suddenly pointed his head, bit his teeth tightly, and forced the attack from the dark toucher, and rushed towards the direction Ellie pointed. He could feel the wound on his shoulder bleeding, and the sound of his torn armor resonating in his ears, but he didn't have time to suck it. He knew that this might be his only chance, not only for the two worlds, but also to figure out who he was. In the deep forest, a dark red light ball floated in the air, emitting dangerous waves, which was the core of the bridge of memory. Lin Xiao suddenly rushed to the light ball and was about to stab him. He suddenly felt a strong dizziness, and the memories of the two worlds in the brain surged at the same time, like a flood hindering his consciousness. "Actually, what are you fucking?" In the real world, Zhang Xiang's voice suddenly sounded, as if it was coming from a remote place. He saw him sitting in the office. Zhang Xiang looked at him with a worried face. Next to him was the anxious face of the supervisor Lao Wang. "Warrior, stop." In the magic world, Carlos's roar rose at the same time, and dark energy rushed in like a storm, trying to stop him from destroying the core. Lin Xiaoran covered his brain, and the sounds of the two worlds intersected in his brain, making him almost unable to think. He could feel his mind being torn apart, and the power of the bridge of memory was like a net, trapping him tightly. But he bit his teeth tightly, forcing himself to focus on the light ball in front of him, lifted up his sword, and stabbed it with all his strength. Room! There was a huge sound, and the light ball exploded instantly, and the dark red light spread like a wave, covering the entire forest shell. Lin Xiao was knocked to the ground by the shock wave, and his ears were Carlos' roar and Ellie's low words, but these sounds were quickly covered by a harsh buzzing sound. His consciousness began to blur, and the pictures of the two worlds scattered like broken glass, and then they were re-spoken, presenting them in a completely new way. When he opened his eyes again, he found that he was standing in a blank space, with a calm belt of light under his feet, and the pulling feeling of the two worlds had disappeared. Ellie stood nowhere, with a tired look on her face, but her eyes were brighter than before. "You did it." Her voice was soft and gratifying. The rules of the Bridge of Memory were broken and the two worlds were reunited. Their fates were no longer connected to each other. "What about me?" Lin Xiaoran looked down at his hands and found that his armor had disappeared and he was wearing ordinary clothes from the real world. But he could feel that his memory was incomplete, as if part of it had been pulled away. "You paid the price." Ellie's eyes softened. A part of the memory was erased as a price to break the rules. But you also gained freedom because of this and no longer be confined by the two worlds. Lin Xiaoran was silent for a while and tried to recall in his brain, and found that some fragments were indeed blurred, the details of the war in the magic world, and some broken daily life in the real world, all seemed to be covered in a layer of mist. He didn't know what he had lost, but he felt a wonderful relaxation in his heart, as if he had finally removed a large stone. "What's wrong with Carlos?" He suddenly remembered the old enemy and asked with his head raised. He was swallowed by the backlash of the Bridge of Memory and no longer existed. A cold voice was filled with a hint of indifference. His ambition made him pay the price. Lin Xiao suddenly pointed and didn't ask any more questions. He looked at the light belt under his feet, and could certainly feel the breath of the two worlds, and although it no longer intersected, it still existed. He knew that part of himself would always belong to that wilderness, and the other part would belong to that noisy city. "I should go back." He turned to Ellie, his voice carrying a burst of fatigue. "There's actually my life in the world, although there may be something different." Ellie smiled slightly and pointed, "Go, warrior. Remember, you have found your true self. No matter which world you are in, you are Lin Xiaoran." As the voice fell, the light began to flow. Lin Xiao suddenly felt a slight dizziness, as if he was gently pushed by something. When he opened his eyes again, he found that he was sitting on the sand of the rental house. The sky outside the window was already lit up, and the morning light came in through the window, illuminating the room warmth. He looked down and held his phone in his hand. The message from Zhang Xiang was displayed on the screen. "Brother, how are you doing today? Have a meal together when you have time." He smiled, replied okay, then stood up, walked to the window and opened the window, looking at the city skyline far away. In the brain, the memory of the magical world has become blurred, but the weight of the long sword, as well as the sound of the war scene, still exists inconveniently. He knew that he was once a warrior and had also changed the fate of two worlds. And now, he is just Lin Xiaoran, an ordinary person, ready to welcome the new day. The sunlight outside the window became brighter and brighter, the city woke up in the morning light, and the sound of cars and people gradually came. He took a deep breath, turned back to the room, picked up his coat, and prepared to leave. Life is still continuing, and he, finally, can no longer be locked by the shackles of memory, and truly live in the present.